with season 5 of Mind Over Music. I'm your host, Sean Ali Molina. So happy to be with everyone this evening. You are listening to Radio Azad, where your voice matters. You're listening from across 163 different countries on a free Radio Azad downloaded app. It's free from the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store. And we're live across all 50 states here in these here United States of America. Tonight, we have a really fun little segment called Vinay's Corner with my special guest, Vinay Singh. He is the author of Your Future in Pieces, as well as Finding Self-Motivated Engagement. He is a human capital expert and also a technology solutions architect. Vinay, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Thank you for being on the show tonight. And Vinay, you know, we talked a little bit earlier throughout this weekend, and you found this really interesting clip. It was this interview with Bill Gates and Jimmy Fallon, and they were talking about the future of robotics. They were talking about the future of work and what that's going to look like. How did you come across that clip? Tell me like your initial thoughts and, you know, what you think the future of work is going to look like from that perspective.
Yeah, sure, Sean. I got to tell you, I take in a lot of economic, corporate, future of work information. And so I think a lot of us are taking in a lot of AI-oriented themes. So it just came across as one of many. But I do like late night, and I do like comedy. So it was fun to watch Bill Gates and Jimmy. And but to your question, there's a lot of things that I did take away, and that one of them was that Bill Gates, you know, he's a global icon. I think we can all agree on that. Yeah. And you know, he said that he predicted that this AI revolution and what is happening he predicted it about 10 years ago. What I found kind of shocking is that all of these big name thought leaders in AI, they knew it was coming. Yeah. But how come we don't have any solutions about like, okay, well, when this comes to displace humanity, this is what we'll do about it. I was surprised not to get that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think that it's inevitable, right? Like, I think sometimes we think about the future, you know, and I've rewatched The Matrix several times with different contexts, right? I recommend everybody go out and rewatch The Matrix because it's so funny because, you know, we call these AI agents, right? The villain of the entire, or the protagonist or the antagonist was Agent Smith, right? And we're still just going down the same exact written script of what we think might happen in a dystopian future of humanity. But, you know, you think about like the context in which the economics of everything is going to change completely, right? I mean, if you have, you know, 1 billion robots or 10 billion robots in the form of like taxis and in the form of like actual robots that we see, humanoid robots or other robots that are delivering, you know, goods, services, performing tasks on behalf of humans, the scale of economy is going to change completely. And, you know, I don't know if we're ready for that. I don't know what governance says about that, but it's going to be really interesting.
100%. Everything you just said is exactly right. It's interesting that you referenced The Matrix, because we are actually, if you peeled back the fact that, okay, humans are walking around and that you have Agent Smith in the movie,
right? Simply
the AI that's in your phone is, you know, you're talking to it. There's commercials like, just go ahead and talk to it, Dad, right? It is that. You don't have to wait for the world not to be, to have humanoid bots. It's already here, right? So really the Matrix is here already. You look at it that way, for sure.
Yeah, it's like, how deep are we in, right? You know, in that Matrix, it was an indistinguishable computer program where you couldn't tell the difference between reality and you know, being used as, you know, a human battery, right? To power these robots, which is really interesting. I don't think it'll go that far. I think that's where there's a huge plot twist. But yeah, you know, it's interesting because you think about the future of the economy. You think about the confidence that Gen X and Gen Z has within the economy, and everything's being run or will eventually be run by AI, by robots, by agents, and even manual work, which we are almost trying to insulate ourselves, you know, against, right? There's so many more vocational programs that are opening up, taking away from traditional college programs where, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a bachelor's or a master's level education. All these things are being displaced. How do you think Gen X and Gen Z are kind of digesting this? Because we have two different articles that we kind of want to address on both of these perspectives today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say, Gen X is really a first digital generation, because when they were in their 20s, .com, internet, AOL, all that stuff, DoubleClick, Google, this was all Amazon, this was here.
Yeah.
1999, 1998, 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So everybody's quite familiar, right? Grandma knows how to use the smartphone and stuff like that. And that's, of course, boomer. But I think what the biggest scenario that's happening right now is not that the chatbots are here. They've already taken people's jobs, right? Mm-hmm. You and I can just walk down the street and we can talk to our colleagues that are creative, that are in publishing, that are in fashion, that are in digital media, marketing, etc. Even chatbots are taking call centers,
legal contracts,
right? So we're exposed to, whoop, how can I help you, right? Yeah. That's already here. But I think when you think about, it's kind of like what I was alluding to with the Bill Gates interviews. You've got these thought leaders that are coming out. There's like three schools of thought, right? And of course there's more, but there's the people, like Gates said, in 10 years, almost all jobs will be taken over by AI. Mm-hmm. Then you have other people that are referencing, and there are Fortune 500 CEOs that are like, okay, it's really not going to do that. Then you've got the MIT and some major PhDs that are saying AI can actually only handle 5% from complex cognitive thinking right now. And so you have these different schools of thought, but nobody is saying, okay, in 5 years, when this happens to you, Johnny, and you, Jennifer, then don't worry, because these are the jobs we have prepared and aligned for you. And I think that's probably why when we get into it, if we're going to get into it now, we've got these articles coming out where Gen Z is actually, they're struggling and they're making jokes to compensate for how bad the scenario is. No one's telling us what we're going to do and what's going to happen to us.
Yeah, let's get into that, right? Because, the whole idea is there's so much uncertainty, and, there's a lot of economic impact that's associated with that, right? When people do not have the confidence in the future of their work, of their well-being, of their economic future, then in the short term, the economy suffers significantly, even if there's no real reason for it to suffer. I mean, you see right now with Doge and the firing of so many government workers, I think that's creating a huge frenzy in the market. And now, you have an economic downturn. It's very volatile, at least right now, to say the least. So, yeah, there are economic impacts that occur because of this stuff. So, where are we with regard to the fulfillment of Gen Z as it relates to, or Generation Alpha now, as it relates to work, the future of work? In my quick assessment is, your job's not going to be taken over by AI. It'll be taken over by someone who is familiar with AI. So I think the first thing is to familiarize yourself with AI, get used to those tools, work with those tools, spend time investing in aligning yourself with new tools, and have fun with it, right? Because it is inevitable. So you might as well enjoy the process. I think the second is, if you are able to do that, then you can own AI agents, and then possibly even take a more entrepreneurial side of things and deploy certain agents or certain infrastructure around a program that you want to develop, and scale that. And now your ability to scale is through the roof. And so you can get so much more productive in a shorter period of time, compress it, and really make a lot of economic impact for yourself if you're fast enough into the game.
I would agree with you. And I'm glad that that's your school of thought, because that's where I'm kind of leaning towards when I'm going to be doing my presentations, because there are three. Nobody's has crystal ball to see it. I think it's a combination of all three, but ultimately a good example is this. Your listeners right now, if you were a bot, would they be interested in listening to you, or do they really want to hear Sean and Sean's thought leaders and guests that come on? I think right now, whether you're Gen X, Millennial, Gen Y, or Gen Z, They don't want to. They don't want to see some kind of robot that's saying, "Hi, I'm interviewing Robot X. What do you think?" That's no fun, right? So they want to hear you, right? And they're interested in what you've been doing. Yeah. I think if we asked whether you're Gen X or Gen Z, let's say an 18-year-old or a 48-year-old, do you want to go see a human doctor, or do you do have the option today in 2025, April 21st, we have a new robot doctor?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would prefer to seeing a human doctor.
I think you and I would, right? I think millennials, Gen X's definitely want to have that human touch. We don't really trust, the robots and the AI as much. But for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, man, they're going to think that we are ridiculous because we want to see a human over like an AI that has access to hundreds of millions of data points and patient journeys and can make a much more correct and analytical assessment as to what their health looks like, right? I think it's two different points because they're living and they're raised by the technology itself, right? So their trust is going to be more so there than it will with other humans. I mean, if you think about kids today, nobody plays outside. Nobody goes to their neighbors' yards, right? Nobody's going over and having sleepovers and playing out in the streets until the street lights come on. That just doesn't exist. And their entire trust model went away from trusting your neighbor and trusting your friends to trusting the technology. And so I think that's what we're going to see play out more.
I'll tell you this. There are some very unique and interesting statistics. I would have thought that would be more. They would be thinking more and more about not wanting to interact with humans. But there is a swing pendulum because Gen Z, I don't think they're hit 30 yet. So I think they're like 28, 29.
26,
right
yeah,
there.
27, yeah, something like that, yeah.
So they are, something like 9 to 29. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
They were raised by Gen X. That's their parents. Mm-hmm. So that's why they have ripped jeans. That's why they're wearing Air Jordans. It's pretty cool. But there's some of the statistics and the information that I'm reading is that they actually want more of that human touch that I was surprised to read. Mm-hmm. So, but you are 100% right. If you are a doctor, like I'm making this example up. If you are a doctor traditionally and you don't have your data points and understanding, there's that, and they would not want that. But if you were a cutting edge doctor that showed up with like your brand new Microsoft Surface with your touch points and said, based upon your data points, and I recently had a young doctor that I went to see, and he had all this fancy stuff, but he had his own like Microsoft Surface, and he was just sitting there going like this, like,
yeah.
I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. So he knew. So I think it's the combination, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly what we were saying, right? It's the people that are aligning with AI to create the next 10 years of work. And then after that, it's, I don't know, it seems like it's going to be universal basic income, right? It's going to be like, we're going to have some economic structure where the US has to supplement based on the amount of productivity that it's going to be able to create through its investment in AI and robotics and the government supplementing all of these technologies moving forward. And really what that means to the average US citizen, right? I mean, there's I forgot the economic package that Trump was trying to create. I'll think of it for our next show, but it's essentially like, if the US wants ByteDance to be divested from its China partners in order to get access to US customers.
Yeah.
Well, the US government would then buy, 50% of ByteDance or, instill a fee or something like that. But that would go back to the US economy. It would go back to the people who are, contributing to the US economy. It would go back to US citizens. Yeah. And I forgot what that economic model is. I'll get the name of it. But, it's a really interesting idea that if the government is subsidizing and supplementing new technologies, which is what it does, right? With everything from space travel to GPS to, now we're going to look at AI and, technology being disseminated. It's also what's going to be happening on Wednesday with tariffs, right? How the U.S. government supplements and reinstills and almost circulates that back into the economy is going to be really important.
Well, I think we're definitely going to have new economic models for sure.
Yeah.
with AI saturating every manner of labor and economic and business activity. That being said, new industries are popping up. And I mean, Sean, look at you, you're on the radio, the radio studio from, I'm going to assume 1980s and 90s, and the technology from the Howard Stern era, like when he was like, I don't know, 25. I can imagine there's such an enormous amount of tech that is AI driven, right? But that doesn't mean it's replaced you, and it hasn't replaced your colleagues. And there's a lot of people doing editing and stuff like that. So economies of scale demand lots of people working to be very creative and to do a lot of stuff. Let me say something else. If the economy, let's just take any nation. So let's just take, we'll take United States and nation B. If United States does not have a robust workforce that understands, educated, and is advancing ideas for innovation in the next AI stream of excitement, right? But nation B over here does, then the United States will become a laggard.
Yep.
I'll just give you a great example. DeepSeek, before DeepSeek, no one questioned the conversations about NVIDIA and whoever else was talking about the compute.
Yep, GPUs,
right?
Yep.
Right? And then DeepSeek came out, and there's lots of conversations about the modeling, the chips that they were using. Was it really the cost that they said it was? There's lots of information. I did not read every single article under the sun about everything that has been come out from China, but there is multiple things that are happening. Regardless of any of it, they designed something that was pretty cutting edge, very cool, and for a fraction of what we in America thought was possible. Yeah?
Yeah.
Right. So who's behind all that? It wasn't just AI. It's teams of really talented people, isn't it? Just think about that. When was the last time you heard anybody even mention that? You didn't. You haven't. I haven't heard it. So talented people, a nation full of talented, excited, motivated people, that's a nation to be reckoned with. And so when you think about the things that I've been talking to you for years, and a lot of my work prior to my current work. Yeah. But that multi-generational modeling that I was talking about and discussing, if you have nations that are motivated and hungry and excited and highly educated, they're the ones that are going to be highly innovative.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it does go back to like the economy of scale, right? So if you think about, the number of radio programs that were out there in the 1980s and 1990s, now you talk about Howard Stern and a few others, the number of programs have significantly reduced. It went from having tens and thousands, hundreds of programs per major metropolitan city to now very few that have actually made it. So that funneling or that bottleneck really has a lot to do with meritocracy, I feel. And when you think about what meritocracy looks like today, a lot of it has to do with pop culture. A lot of it has to do with, the new world order. And, where is everyone thinking? You look at entertainment as probably the leading factor, right? Yeah. And then, the lagging factor would probably be like pure intelligentsia, right? And I think that when you combine the two and you find this little sweet spot, then you see, okay, like, everything from, K-pop and K-dramas, right, kind of coming out. But the US is still leading this popular culture around ideation, around what freedom looks like, comedy, like all these different segments. And so to have an English-based program, to have something that is connected to the rest of the world, your ability to scale just based on these meritocratic, I guess, like loopholes kind of that are built within the system, just based on where you're born and the language that you speak, is really interesting. We're in a great incredible advantage. And I think that's why it's so important for us to lead the innovation in AI moving forward, and because and even if we didn't, right, how many people today would be willing to take a chance to go out on a limb? I know this was very true 10 years ago. I think it's less so now, to learn Mandarin, because we see that Chinese tech companies are going to start taking over, and the CCP is going to be able to really invigorate the economy, the Chinese economy, and new Chinese companies. We haven't really seen that, right? Once they turn it on, I can understand, but where we were 10 years ago and how we thought we were going to compete is significantly different. I mean, the Chinese GDP is $10 trillion below us, whereas just a few years ago they were only like $4 trillion behind us. And so now there's a definite margin there, and how we're going to reinvest into the economy, I think, is going to be really important.
Yeah, India is obviously growing leaps and bounds. What Asia as a continent will do in the next 10, 20 years, there's lots of conversations about that. I wanted to circle back to something that you had said about the thousands of radio stations there were. And I believe a lot of that was M&A activity, right? But truly the internet, like, there was no such thing as podcasting. Now, you might know better than me. I would assume you would. I don't know how many podcasters there are, but I'm just wondering, like, if you had thousands of radio stations and now you have a small amount, but don't you have like an incredible amount of like podcasters? I mean, you're a great example, right? I mean, your radio show. So isn't the amount of variety of people to listen to it didn't go away until like 3.
Yeah. Like
if there was 1,000 radio stations, there might be 100, but there's 900 podcasters who've taken up that.
Yeah, and it's the dissemination of technology, right? And it's all. I think it has there's a few things, right? So I think one thing that you see is how quickly you can run through a podcast, how available the technology is, and how load bearing that technology could be. So can it have hundreds of millions of listeners listening in live or in real time, or can you download it offline? How convenient is it? Am I listening at live pace, or am I listening at 2x, right? And how quickly can I get through the content? So there are a lot of variations, but the accessibility for anybody to get on and have a platform to have viewership, or to be able to access it, that's kind of what YouTube was built on, right? And now Spotify and so many others are kind of building on top of that, so that they can democratize the technology and podcasts, and give everybody a voice to hear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is that when Stern was big, and I assume that was like in the late 80s, right? Maybe
Yeah.
I remember. Don't hold me to this, but only that small amount of time, there was like 3.5 billion people on the planet, and now I think we're at 8, if not right there.
Yeah. I think we're over 8 now.
So we have that many more billions of people hungry for culture, variety, et cetera. So there's that to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to look up the human population, but I think that's really interesting. There is this idea around Gen X, and as we kind of wrap up this segment here, we talked about the sunsetting that the Gen X generation is kind of seeing now. It's a little bit depressing. I feel like Gen X just kind of got, in weird ways, short ends of the stick. They were kind of always told like the world is ending, and to get ready for nuclear warfare and things of that sort. And but also being the first to innovate and bring the human experience into the digital framework, right? And Steve Jobs, and kind of like coming out of that hippie era of being a free a freewheeling thought leader, right? Like those things are super important as well. So where's Gen X in the continuum of the technology revolution, and how do you reinstill this sense of we still need the leadership, we still need the ideation? How do we kind of re-engage Gen X in a way that we don't just leave them behind, but also we don't leave Gen Z behind either, right? We as millennials are kind of stuck in the middle, but it's a great sweet spot for me, at least.
It's a great question. And so when I got into the field of human capital transformation and management. Gen X was in their young to mid 20s.
Yeah.
So they're not so far away. I think the youngest Gen X is like 45, and the oldest is maybe like 60. Yeah. But if you think about it, today, the statistics are Gen Z, mass Gen Z, basically all have the ability to get to and over the year 100 in lifespan.
Yep.
And boomers are in their 80s and 90s. So that means X and Y are 90 to 95 to 100. So we're let's just say we're all living to be 90 to 100.
Yep.
It doesn't even compute logically if you have so much billions of people with talent that want to work,
yep,
2 can work, to develop employment, right? Because if you make money, you spend money.
Right.
If you don't make money, you don't spend money.
Yep.
And then of course that's taxable money too. So I think that what happens to X will happen to Y, will happen to Z. And I think smart nations will start to realize there's just too much talent. Pushing people out in their prime is not a recipe for national economic success.
Yeah.
And that's actually some of the work that I've been designing and developing for economic modeling. And I'll be able to bring some of that to you because that's some of the stuff that I was just finishing up at Oxford too.
Nice. I love it. Well, yeah, I mean, and you have such an incredible, rap sheet of huge institutions that you've been a part of: Columbia University, Oxford. The human population, I just checked, it's 8.2 billion, and
already passed. See, they went right past us.
Right past us, yeah. And certain nations have the most youngest people in the world, right? Like you think about West Africa, and certain parts of India, like just very, very young swaths of people that are motivated, that want to work, that want to get things moving. And if you don't engage your workforce, your people, if you're not growing as a population, that is the first indication of decline, of global decline, of change in the new world order and things of that sort. So we have to be very mindful in how we engage. But if robots take over anyway and create all the economic impact, then I don't know if what population density really holds from that standpoint. But we'll get into it. We'll talk more about it in future episodes.
That sounds good. Hey, I do want to tell you this though. In that article that we were talking about over the weekend about Gen Z, they're kind of making jokes about the recession.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is because Gen Z and millennials, they saw their parents going through the .com crash. Some of them, like you went through the Great Recession. Gen Z, I think a lot of them were like very young. So they had parents that went through. So I think that it doesn't really help a nation and the nation's leaders. You can say whatever you want, but young people are very smart people. They know what happened. And when a recession comes, and if all their parents got laid off, and a recession comes, I think my math is right. A recession comes every 6.8 years on average across time.
Yeah. That
means there's another one coming. So if the response by the nation is every single time a recession hits, we just lay off people. Yeah. Eventually, I think this is where you have a Gen Z that's making fun of it and joking about it and just being like, this isn't funny. We don't really, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that they are a little upset with leadership.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the amount of debt that they're in. You think about the ability for somebody that's in their 20s to find the American dream and like own a small business or buy their own home with that white picket fence. Just doesn't exist, right? And so they're living at home with their parents. Most of them are. So it's really interesting the dynamics of how we're going to move forward. But that kind of concludes our segment today. But stay tuned, everybody, for next week. Maybe next week, Vinay, we can talk a little bit more about these young nations and what they're going to do with their workforce and how they're going to start getting engaged in the future as well.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That's Vinay Singh, the author of Your Future in Pieces and Finding Self-Motivation, Motivated Engagement. Pick up those books anywhere you buy books. Vinay, thank you so much for joining us tonight.